The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is often hailed as one of the most unique and memorable entries in the Zelda series. Released in 2000 as a follow-up to Ocarina of Time, a game many consider to be the greatest Zelda game of all time, it took a bold departure from the typical Zelda formula by exploring darker themes, unconventional gameplay mechanics, and an atmosphere filled with dread and mystery. At its core, Majora's Mask tells the story of Termina, a world doomed to destruction in 3 days unless Link intervenes. The game's haunting portrayal of an impending apocalypse and its exploration of mortality, grief, and identity have left an indelible mark on fans and the gaming industry. This video will delve into the elements that makes Majora's Mask an eerie take on the end of the world and why it stands as one of the best Zelda games ever released, and in my opinion, far better than Ocarina of Time. The setting of Majora's Mask, the parallel world of Termina, is unlike any other location in the Zelda franchise. Its impending doom, with the moon ominously descending towards the land, creates a constant sense of dread and urgency. From the bustling clock town, where citizens prepare for a festival in the face of imminent destruction, to the desolate swamps, snowy mountains, and murky oceans, each region in Termina reflects the game's darker themes. The unique ambiance of Termina, filled with NPCs exhibiting varying reactions to the end, reinforces the game's oppressive atmosphere. Unlike the hopeful fantasy settings in most Zelda games, Termina feels eerie and grounded in its own sorrowful reality. Throughout Termina, players witness NPCs grappling with the inevitability of their fates. The townspeople continue with their routines, some in denial, others in quiet acceptance, and a few in despair. This dynamic adds an emotional depth to Majora's Mask that isn't present in most Zelda games. The moon, with its grotesque face and unyielding descent, serves as a constant reminder of the time ticking away. Unlike the typical triumphant hero's journey, Majora's Mask immerses players in a bleak world, forcing them to confront the concept of mortality and how individuals cope with it. This layered portrayal of an apocalyptic world adds gravitas to the game's themes and narrative. The central mechanic of Majora's Mask, the 3-day cycle, is both a gameplay and narrative innovation. Unlike typical Zelda games that allow players to explore at their own pace, Majora's Mask limits Link to repeating a cycle of 3 days, adding a layer of tension and urgency to every action. Players must reset time using the Song of Time, but this reset undoes certain accomplishments and resets characters as routines. This cycle creates a paradox where players must balance progression and the need to restart, immersing them in the relentless pressure of time slipping away. The mechanic conveys the fleeting nature of existence in a world on the brink of annihilation. The 3-day cycle compels players to think critically about how to spend their time in Termina. Every interaction and side quest must be carefully planned and executed within the cycle's limitations. This structure encourages experimentation and rewards players who learn the schedules and behavior of Termina's inhabitants. The repetitive nature of the cycle might seem restrictive, but it adds a unique layer of immersion, making players feel as if they're part of Termina's doomed reality. The cycle's structure reinforces the game's themes of mortality, loss, and the struggle to find meaning in a limited lifespan. The cycle's designs also emphasize the bittersweet nature of the game's quests. Completing a task only to reset the clock and undo these accomplishments highlights the transitory nature of life. This mechanic encourages players to find joy in small moments and connections even when we know they won't last. One of the most defining elements of Majora's Mask is the use of masks, which serve both gameplay and symbolic purposes. Link acquires various masks that allow him to transform into different beings, each with its own abilities and limitations. The Deku, Goron, and Zora masks in particular grant Link the ability to explore Termina in new ways and connect with the inhabitants of different regions. These transformations allow Link to assume new identities, challenging players to navigate the world throughout multiple perspectives. These masks symbolize the fluidity of identity and the idea that individuals can embody various roles depending on their circumstances. Each transformation mask is tied to a character who met a tragic fate, and by wearing these masks, Link embodies these spirits. This connection between masks and tragedy reflects the game's themes of loss and mourning, as Link takes on the forms of the fallen Deku butler's son, the Goron hero Damani, and the Zora musician Mikao. Players are reminded of the personal stories and sacrifices tied to each mask. These transformations allow for players to experience the world through the lens of these characters' lives, creating a sense of empathy and shared sorrow. The masks ultimately represent the transformation transformative power of empathy and understanding. Link's ability to take on the identities of others highlights the value of walking in someone else's shoes, even if only temporarily. This symbolic exploration of identity and transformation adds emotional depth to Majora's Mask, turning it into an introspective journey that goes beyond traditional heroism. Majora's Mask delves deeply into themes of mortality, with the looming moon serving as a constant reminder of the inevitability of death. Unlike other Zelda games where Link's journey is a straightforward quest to save the world, Majora's Mask forces players to confront the fragility that is life. NPCs throughout Termina are acutely aware of their limited time, and their reactions vary from denial to despair to even quiet acceptance. This diversity in responses to the end of the world gives players a nuanced view of how different personalities grapple with mortality, making Majora's Mask a meditation on the human experience in the face of inevitable death. The game's side quests often revolve around themes of loss and acceptance, highlighting the emotional struggles of Termina's inhabitants. The storyline of Anju and Kafei, a couple torn apart on the eve of their wedding, is particularly poignant. Their quest reflects the tragedy of separation and the strength found in unity even as doom approaches. Similarly, the Goron Elder's despair over his people's hardships in Snowhead and the Deku King's frantic search for his daughter are reminders of the universal desire to protect loved ones. The game's ending reinforces the message of acceptance, whereas after Link's final confrontation with Majora, he is left in Termina to witness a world reborn and at peace. The characters have moved past their fears, symbolizing the healing that comes from facing mortality and finding closure. This conclusion elevates Majora's Mask beyond a simple adventure game, transforming it into a contemplative experience about life, death, and the resilience of the human spirit. One of the most iconic elements of Majora's Mask is the moon with its menacing, exaggerated face. Hurtling towards Termina with relentless speed, the moon's grotesque, almost anthropomorphic visage serves as a physical embodiment of doom, constantly looming over the world as a reminder of the impending apocalypse. Its presence is unsettling, a silent but powerful figure that drives the entire narrative. This symbolic use of the moon to represent inevitable destruction resonates deeply with players, as it reflects humanity's anxiety over forces beyond our control, from natural disasters to existential threats. The symbolism of the moon is further emphasized by its proximity to Termina. Unlike typical threats in video games that remain abstract or distant until the climax, the moon in Majora's Mask is omnipresent, visible at all times and drawing closer with each passing hour. This physical closeness makes the threat feel immediate and personal, intensifying the game's atmosphere of dread. The countdown clock and periodic reminders of the moon's descent amplifies this urgency, making players feel as though they are truly racing against time to prevent catastrophe. The looming presence of the moon is a constant source of anxiety, reinforcing the game's themes of mortality and the unstoppable march of time. The moon also serves as a visual representation of the mask's corrupting influence on Skull Kid. As players progress through the game, it becomes clear that the moon's descent is not just a random disaster, but a direct consequence of Skull Kid's possession by Majora's Mask. This connection between the moon and the mask reflects how Skull Kid's personal pain and loneliness have been magnified into a world-ending threat. The moon, therefore, becomes a symbol of the destructive power of unchecked emotions, a theme that resonates with the game's exploration of grief, anger, and fear. Ultimately, the moon's symbolism contributes to Majora's Mask's eerie atmosphere and its meditation on the nature of inevitable disaster. The fact that players can never truly stop the moon's descent, only delay it by resetting the cycle, reflects the inescapable nature of mortality. This cyclical aspect of the game, combined with the ever-present moon, turns Majora's Mask into an exploration of how people face the end individually and collectively. Majora's Mask utilizes a distinct art style that enhances its dark and surreal atmosphere. The game repurposes many assets from Ocarina of Time, but adds an unsettling twist, creating an uncanny familiarity that feels both warped and twisted. This decision to recycle assets in a more surreal context amplifies the sense of unease as players recognize familiar elements that have been altered to fit the darker narrative. These slightly distorted characters, exaggerated expressions, and muted colors contribute to an atmosphere of dreamlike dissonance, giving Majora's Mask a visual identity that aligns with its themes of distortion and decay. The game's color palette reflects the mood of each area in Termina, shifting from the vibrant hues of Clocktown to the muted chilly tones of Snowhead and the eerie washed out look of Ikana Canyon. These visual shifts are subtle yet powerful, reinforcing the emotional tone of each region and reflecting the inner turmoil of its inhabitants. The attention to visual detail enhances the game's narrative, with each area in Termina symbolizing a different emotional struggle or stage of grief. This use of color and visual storytelling transforms Majora's Mask into a deeply atmospheric experience that immerses players within its world. In the end, the unique art style of Majora's Mask contributes significantly to its legacy as one of the most atmospheric Zelda games ever created. The visuals not only set it apart from other entries in the series, but also complement its themes of existential dread, loss, and the surreal nature of Termina. Skull Kid, the mischievous yet tragic antagonist of Majora's Mask, is one of the most complex characters in the Zelda series. Unlike many typical villains driven by pure malice or ambition, Skull Kid's descent into darkness stems from loneliness, rejection, and a desperate need for connection. His transformation from a playful, misunderstood character to an instrument of destruction under the influence of Majora's Mask is heart-wrenching. This transformation adds an emotional layer to the narrative that makes Skull Kid feel deeply human, despite his fantastical appearance. He embodies the pain of isolation and how easy loneliness can turn into anger and resentment, themes that resonate universally with players. Skull Kid has experienced profound abandonment, leading to his bitterness and eventual susceptibility to the mask's dark influence. The mask amplifies his inner pain, twisting his playful tricks into sinister acts that threaten Termina's very existence. Yet, even as Skull Kid wreaks havoc, there are those moments when his vulnerability and sorrow peek through, reminding players that he too is a victim of Majora's Mask. This duality of innocence and corruption makes him one of the most sympathetic antagonists in this series. Ultimately, Skull Kid's redemption arc is what solidifies him as one of the most memorable antagonists in the Zelda series. In the game's conclusion, after Link frees him from Majora's influence, Skull Kid expresses genuine remorse, suggesting that he has grown from his experiences. His final reunion with Tattle and Tail, and the forgiveness he receives from the Giants, gives his character arc a bittersweet resolution, leaving players with a sense of hope that even the most troubled souls can find redemption. The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is more than just a video game. It's an emotional journey that challenges players to confront complex themes of mortality, loss, redemption, and the relentless passage of time. From its unsettling atmosphere to its hauntingly tragic characters like Skull Kid, the game invites players into a world on the brink of destruction, filled with characters clinging to hope amidst despair. Through its immersive time-based gameplay and cyclical structure, Majora's Mask turns what could have been a traditional fantasy adventure into a meditation on the nature of human resilience and the inevitability of life's end. Ultimately, Majora's Mask stands as a testament to the power of storytelling in video games. It uses its mechanics, characters, and setting to evoke emotions rarely explored in the medium, leaving an indelible impact on players. The game doesn't just challenge Link to save Termina, but also invites players to reflect on the transient nature of life, the importance of connection, and the value of confronting one's fears. Majora's Mask, therefore, is at its core a game about embracing the present, understanding loss, and finding redemption in even the darkest of times. A masterpiece that remains unparalleled in its emotional depth and artistic ambition. As time moves forward, Majora's Mask will continue to influence game design and storytelling, as it remains not only one of the best Zelda games ever released, but also one of the most thought-provoking and memorable experiences in gaming history.
Oh, track on my love.